to A Year of HitchcockMovies.com. We are your hosts, Jeff and Diane, and this is movie number 11 from 1934, The Man Who Knew Too Much. And this is what we're going to call Phase 2. The next bunch of movies are Phase 2. And Phase 2 basically is where Alfred Hitchcock was happy and he was doing the kinds of movies he wanted to do. Nobody was messing with him. Makes us very happy. And he'll actually stay happy until the end of Phase 2 in about 6 movies from now. So that's good. And we're starting with the film, basically, that triggered Hitchcock's reputation as the master of suspense. So we're very excited. After last week's number 17 turned out to be a commercial and a critical failure, Hitchcock was cut adrift by British International Pictures. And now remember, he did have some success, a tremendous success with The Lodger, with Blackmail, with Murder, at least a few of which were called by critics at the time as the best British movie ever. So, you know, he certainly was able to entertain ideas and consider various projects. And believe it or not, the project he took on at this moment in time was a musical called Waltzes from Vienna at a studio in London called Gaumont British. Now, this movie is not available on DVD, so we're skipping it. Hitchcock later described it as a musical without much music, and that it really wasn't his sort of thing. In fact, by the time they were halfway through filming it, Hitchcock realized his mistake in taking on this project and stated to the whole crew could hear, he stated, "I really hate this sort of stuff." Well, the head of the studio heard this and came down and asked him, well, what would you like to do? This probably was a question that Alfred Hitchcock had not heard for some time. So he thought about it, and what he said he'd really like to do is team up with Charles Bennett, who had written the play for Blackmail, and do films and stories about suspense and intrigue. The head of the studio said, okay, sign him to a 5-picture deal. This 5-picture deal turns out to be so successful that it lands Hitchcock in Hollywood with David O. Selznick, just as O. Selznick was producing Gone with the Wind, and where Hitchcock will immediately win a Best Picture Oscar for the movie Rebecca in 1940. Cool. Including Waltzes from Vienna, he'll actually make 7 pictures for Gaumont British, starting with The Man Who Knew Too Much. This is the original. Of course, Alfred Hitchcock remade this movie in 1956 with James Stewart and Doris Day. Both movies are about the same in idea. A little bit of background on this movie. Basically, you've got an ordinary family. They're vacationing in the Swiss Alps and in St. Moritz, more specifically a father, a mother, and a daughter. They're watching a ski jump competition. The mother is involved in a skeet shooting competition. She's in a contest, and it's all fun and games until a new best friend they've met, this French guy named Louis. He's actually one of the ski jumpers in the competition. Well, he's shot, and as he's dying, he whispers something to the mom about a shaving brush in his room, and there's your movie. Interesting too. The husband is played by Leslie Banks. We'll see him again in a Hitchcock picture later called Jamaica Inn from 1939. Leslie Banks served in World War I and received injuries that made the left side of his face badly scarred and paralyzed, slightly paralyzed. So he would use this to his advantage in films. When he was playing a good guy, he would only show the right side of his face. And in the movie we're about to see, because he's the good guy, pretty much every shot they show of him is of his right profile. Now, if he was being a good guy or doing a romantic lead, he would show that side. He would show the other side if he was in a more dramatic role or being a bad guy. And you'll see a little bit of that, this picture here, although I think what you're seeing is a bit of shadow, but you can see some of the scarring. And when you see him in Jamaica, he's kind of a bad guy, and you'll see much of his left face, but not in this one. The wife is played by Edna Best. She's the cool blonde in this Alfred Hitchcock movie. She was actually married to Herbert Marshall, who played Sir John in our movie Murder. The daughter is played by a young actress named Nova Pilbeam. We'll see her again as the star of Young and Innocent in a few years. She's a little more grown up because that's 4 years from now. And we have to mention the bad guy in this movie, not to give anything away, but he is the bad guy. He's in all the posters. Well, it's Peter Lorre. It's the great Peter Lorre. Peter Lorre was acting in Germany at the time. In fact, his first major role, he was cast in a movie, a German-spoken movie called M by director Fritz Lang. Where he's the bad guy. He plays a child murderer, and it is just an excellent movie. The performance by Peter Lorre is excellent. I had never seen it until this week. I'm bitter about that. I wish I would have seen it. It's fantastic. You'll never see Peter Lorre the same. But shortly thereafter, after being in a couple more movies in German, basically he had to flee Germany because of the timing. He had to flee Nazi Germany. So he went to France and then to Britain, where he met Hitchcock, and he was immediately cast in our movie tonight, The Man Who Knew Too Much. Then, of course, went off to Hollywood and made The Maltese Falcon, made Casablanca, a bunch of other Humphrey Bogart movies, had great success with the Mr. Moto series, and had a really great career. So Peter Lorre. And legend has it that he spoke little or no English when he met Hitchcock, although Hitchcock didn't know that. And in tonight's movie, he learned all of his dialogue phonetically, so look for that. Speaking of fleeing the Nazis, timing of this movie, 1934, Hitler had just become Chancellor of Germany in 1933, leading to Peter Lorre need to flee Germany. In the United States, the president, Franklin Roosevelt, had survived an assassination attempt in Florida. And who could forget the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand, which events triggered basically World War I. And the scars on Leslie Banks' face. So, anyways, Hitchcock did have somewhat of a limited budget on this movie, and you'll see that in some shots. You can see they could have spent a little more money. They did their best. But the huge success of this movie led to more money and bigger budgets, which is great news. There's a possible cameo in this movie. It's not official, but it might be him next to a double-decker bus when they're back in London. So we're not sure if we're seeing him, but we will see Claire Greet, who of course is in more Hitchcock movies than anyone else besides Hitchcock. She was the fortune teller in The Ring, and I didn't mention it, but she was on the jury in the movie Murder. And we'll also see someone named Joan Harrison. She has a bit part in this movie. She plays a secretary. I can't even remember seeing her. I'll look for a secretary. That's Joan Harrison, because in 1934 she actually became Hitchcock's real-life secretary. He couldn't live without her. She became a screenwriter for 5 Hitchcock movies. She wrote a few of them by herself. And as we know, this is pretty much it. Alfred Hitchcock got out of the writing of the movie's business and let other people do it. So now, born in 1934 was Shirley MacLaine, who Alfred Hitchcock will direct in the movie The Trouble with Harry in 1955, in her very first movie. Very good. So now, from 1934, The Man Who Knew Too Much. Let's watch.